the Bay of Plenty to be with us today as well. It's awesome to have you here. Look, as you know, under Labor, crime is out of control. We have seen violent crime up 33%. We have seen serious assaults have more than doubled, and we've seen gang membership grow by over 70%, to the point that there is now 9 gang members for every 10 police officers in this country. And gangs have been an unwelcome part of New Zealand's criminal scene and a large part of the drug scene now for several decades. But we have to be honest and say that over the last 6 years, their numbers and the level of violence that we have started to see and that they have engaged with has increased significantly as Labor have buried their head in the sand. And while Chris Hipkins continues to defend his government's decision to spend taxpayer money funding gang rehab programs like the $2.75 million he gave to the mongrel mob, National will back the police. And we're going to give them a range of new powers to disrupt and to crack down on gang crime so that we will all feel safer in our homes and our businesses and our communities. New Zealanders, frankly, are sick of seeing gang members block traffic. They're sick of them taking over small towns like we saw not too far from here in Opotiki, and intimidating and violent assaults in the middle of broad daylight, as we have just seen in the Coromandel township just recently as well. And while Labor may shrug its shoulders and say, look, there's nothing to see here, the reality is National is going to uphold the simple right of a New Zealander to feel publicly safe in their own home, their business, their community. We don't have to accept that this is what it is now in New Zealand. We can choose a different pathway, and that's what we believe. National won't accept it. We say enough is enough. And so today we are confirming that if we win the election, National's 100-day action plan will include the introduction of legislation cracking down on gangs and giving police more powers. Passing those measures through Parliament will be a priority for National and government, and we'll introduce it in our first 100 days. The proposed laws that we're proposing, as you know from our policy announcement in June last year, are actually based on similar powers introduced in Western Australia that have been very successful in dismantling gangs from the inside and halting their ability to operate in public with impunity. I'm going to hand over to Paul Goldsmith just to remind you about the 4 components of our policy and our plan that will form the basis of the legislation we want to introduce in the first 100 days. Paul? Oh, sorry, Lee.
Thank you, Christopher. The 4 measures are, as you'll recall, first banning gang patches and insignia in public. They are already banned in public buildings like hospitals, and we're going to go further because they intimidate the public. The second one is empowering police to issue dispersal notices to suspected gang members to prevent public gatherings. The third one is authorising police to issue consorting prohibition notices to prevent known gang offenders from associating for up to 3 years. And the fourth one is introducing new firearm protection orders to prevent gang members from possessing firearms, allowing police warrantless searches of their homes and vehicles. It's time Parliament stepped up with some more ways to assist police in countering gangs, and these measures will do just that. Thank you.
Awesome.
Back to you.
Well, thank you, Paul. And can I just say again, we are a party of law and order. We want to restore law and order in New Zealand. We want to make sure personal responsibility is at the heart of our society. We're going to do that, and a big part of that is tackling gangs in the way that we're talking about here. But I'm making it very clear to the New Zealand people, if you want a new government that's actually going to rebuild the economy, restore law and order, and deliver better health and education, then party vote National. There's a lot at stake at this election, and what happens here shapes it for the future course for New Zealand for some time to come. With that, happy to take your questions.
On your gangs, going back to the scenario that Paddy used last night of, sort of a very hostile situation with a lot of gang members and police, you would expect police to go in there and rip the patches off those gang members, knowing that they could be injured in that process.
Well, it's not that complicated in the sense of we already have legislation that has been passed that does exactly the same thing with respect to gang patches in public buildings. And all we're asking is the same legislation is now extended to public places. And so whether the police are able to do that at the moment, at that time, or whether frankly they're actually able to identify, prosecute and fine those gang members, so be it.
The difference though is the expectation, right? You said last night that you would expect police to go in there. So that is sort of the government intervening in an operational matter from police, which is different.
It will be ultimately up to the police, but what I'd say to you is passing legislation that bans the wearing of gang patches in public places, as we've seen in other jurisdictions in Australia, is quite an acceptable and doable task and challenge. In the same way, gang members now no longer wear their gang patches out into government buildings. We expect them not to be wearing them in public.
So you'll be passing legislation that may not be used?
Well, we're going to be using we'll be passing legislation that will be used. These are laws and rules, laws that have existed in Australia that we have seen that have had great effect.
Find that they need it operationally. Do you see what?
No, police. Our expectation is that gang members will not be wearing their gang patches in public places.
Do you not trust police to make their own
that is quite
police
straightforward.
operationally?
Once we pass the legislation, we're taking already today. A gang member cannot go into a government building with their gang patch on. Simple. That's the law. That's the rule. And now the new law will be a gang member will not be wearing their patches in public.
So will you?
And if there's the case, then that there's a prosecution and a fine and a risk of imprisonment.
Will you write it into the legislation that gang tangies in particular will be disrupted by police if they occur with gang patches?
What we will be having the legislation for is to extend the not wearing gang patches in public places. It's very simple. It's done in Western Australia, done in other places, and it will be then left to police to make sure that the punishment, which is a fine and/or risk of imprisonment, is enforced.
Have you consulted with police on it?
Sorry?
Have you consulted with police?
Mark Mitchell and I, we designed this policy back in June last year, if you remember correctly, and we have seen the evidence of this working incredibly well in Western Australia and parts of Queensland as well. Because what it's sending a message through is if you want to wear a gang patch, and to get a gang patch, you've got to have done some violent things. That is not acceptable in public places. We're just extending it out.
Have you consulted with police?
It's not appropriate for an opposition party to consult with the police on the development of their policy. They're independent.
Formally.
So that's how that process works. But we're ready to go.
So, if you talk anecdotally though, it's appropriate to speak to police on the beat. You talk to Mark Mitchell's got a lot of friends.
We have a lot of conversation with a lot of stakeholders in the police world, but we don't formally engage with the police because we're not able to do so in opposition.
You can formally engage with the police union. Have you done so?
We have in the development of many of our policy over the course of the last year when we announced this policy back in June last year.
And is this something they're telling you that they want?
What we're saying is, what we want to do is we're making it very clear. We want it. That's what we're wanting it. We're not going to have gang members walking around in public places with their patches on. We're going to give police the powers to have dispersal powers to break them up in public places when they're being intimidating. We're going to give police the powers to actually give them the non-consorting powers they need to break them up from planning criminal activity. And we are going to make sure that when we've got firearm prohibition orders, that there are warrantless search powers to seize illegal guns from cars and from gang pads. Simple. These are a set of rules that we've seen. We've seen them work in states in Australia where there's been a huge crackdown on gangs and that they just cannot open with impunity out in the open and in public, and that's important.
How will having a patch taken off them discourage them from carrying out more crime? And
well, what's the alternative? The alternative is to do what Chris Hipkins has done. Gang numbers have grown 70%. We now have 9,000 gang members. 9,000 for every 10,000 police officers. That is not a place that we're happy to accept. We're going to make life difficult for the gangs. I get that. That's why they don't want to vote or support us in this election. That's why they do want to vote and support the Labour Party in this election. But the message is very clear. I'm sorry, but gang life is not a pathway forward, and it will be difficult, and we will make life difficult for you as a gang member.
But to Giles'
Sorry.
How do you deal with gang colours? Now, we just had a case in New Plymouth where someone got killed because they were wearing the wrong colour in court.
Well, what we're saying, I'll push you back to our policy, which we announced in June. You were there last year up in Auckland when we announced it. We're saying we're going to ban gang patches and insignia in public. It's that simple.
But is insignia a red shirt?
Again, we're banning gang patches and insignia.
So gang members can wear their colours?
May well be the case, Richard, but I wouldn't get too hung up on that. I think the bigger issue here is 70% growth in gang members, gang driving so much organised crime, causing peddling misery across New Zealand, actually critical to the drug trade in this country. And I'm sorry, but enough is enough. There are rights and responsibilities in this country. And the presentation that gangs are just nice people and just a bit misunderstood. I'm sorry, they want the rights of being a Kiwi, but they're not prepared to take the responsibilities, which is that you look after your fellow citizen as well.
Sorry, Aaron.
To Giles's point, if you tear the gang patches off, then how are you going to identify them?
What we're saying is the police know how to identify gang members. There's a dedicated gang list. We have it already that we use for when gangs cannot wear their patches in public places, in government buildings, and we'll just be extending that very clearly out to what we do here in public places.
To be clear, you're in Whakatane today, walking down the street, a gang member with a gang patch is walking down the street, you expect police to sprint after them and rip that patch off?
We're making it illegal. We're laying a law down very simply. In the same way today, a gang member knows not to go into a public building with their patch on, whether it's a school, a hospital or whatever, right? They know that. All we're doing is saying you won't be wearing it in public,
But would
and there'll be fines and a penalty for that.
But would that scenario
Sorry,
be
Sam.
Can I
expectation?
change tack a little bit? Chris Hipkins says national race baiting. What do you say to that?
Oh, I disagree completely. I mean, Chris Hipkins is a desperate guy in a desperate situation, and he has no record to run on, and he has no ideas to take the country forward. And sadly for him, I think he's turned the debate into a very negative one and a personal one. I get it, but actually, I don't think he's on the wrong track.
Are your voters racist? Are your voters racist?
No.
How do you know that this policy...
Sorry, just finished Sam's
I'm
question.
just going to go to just another thing as well quickly. What influence will tax cuts have on the way people vote this election, and what's your message to them?
Well, New Zealanders want tax relief, and particularly lower middle income New Zealanders who are doing it incredibly tough, and that's what I want to deliver for them. These are the people that are in what we call the squeeze middle. They wake up each morning, they go to work, they pay their taxes, they get their kids to school, they take on a second job, and they still can't get ahead. And the reason they can't is because this government's let inflation get out of control. It's driven interest rates up and it's slowed up the economy. And what we're saying is we're going to give you tax relief so that you can navigate the cost of living. It's only fair that we do so.
We know you don't say
Sorry,
taking GST off fruit and vegetables, but what about keeping it simple and doing it off all food?
Again, that's not our policy because, frankly, taking GST off food becomes very complex, and we think it's a very clean tax mechanism. But I can tell you, there is no way that 15% off fruit and vegetables is coming through to a customer or a consumer. There is no way that a grocery commissioner roaming around with a clipboard looking at the price of bananas is going to work in order to see that happen. And on the other hand, extending the fuel excise tax actually just runs up the cost of actually delivering food from farm to store and only raises the prices of food anyway.
Can you back on that?
Sorry, Amelia.
Back on last night. So, in light of that racist comment that was made by the New Zealand First candidate, how can you, in good conscience, work with a party with that in their midst?
Well, as I said to you, I don't condone those statements at all. I think they're vile and offensive comments from an individual. What I'm saying very clearly to the New Zealand people is, and I don't necessarily want to work with Winston Peters, but I will pick up the phone and actually make that call as a last resort if it means avoiding 3 years of more of the same. And that's why my pitch has been very clearly, think intentionally about where you're directing your party vote this time, and I would encourage you to party vote national because that gives us a strong, stable government on the other side.
Do you trust Winston Peters?
I'm sure I can work with him. I'm sure I'll be able to work with him if I need to, but that's not my preference. My preference is a strong, stable, national act two-party coalition.
The last bit, your now campaign chair tweeted in 2020 that it was leadership that Simon Bridges ruled out working with Winston Peters. So what does that say about your own leadership that you aren't able to do that?
Well, I
now?
think I've laid it up very clearly to the New Zealand people over the last few weeks, which is saying, number one, party vote national, because this is a serious election. It's going to be close and it's going to be tight, and if you want change, you've got to vote for national. Secondly, my strong preference is to actually form a two-party coalition with National and ACT, because I think that's in the best interest of New Zealand, and I think that will get the change away. But if on the election night the New Zealand voters, who are never wrong, they're in charge here, the voters are in charge, and they determined to send New Zealand First back to Parliament, and if I needed him in order to form a government to avoid another 3 years of the chaos that would be Te Pāti Māori, the Greens and Labour together, then I would make that call. Now, we remember 2017, and let's be honest, New Zealand First hasn't gone with National for 27 years. But all I'm saying to you is, as a matter of last resort, I would pick up the phone.
Also on last night, you've made some pretty big promises with some pretty big cheeks attached to them. Have you gone through and costed all of the promises that you made up, and will we be seeing that in your...
Well, I stand by a commitment on bowel cancer. It's something that Shane Retty and I have been talking about for some time. What you'll see is I've asked him already, even this morning, to go and talk, day one, go to the Ministry of Health, go to the Treasury and actually get the business case together for that. It'll take time to get implemented, I'm sure, because we have issues around staffing and frontline resources. But actually, it's the right thing to do, and so you'll actually see us do that.
But have you had to change your fiscal plan as a result of the promises made?
No, because the way that we're building our fiscal plan is that we're building a significant amount of buffer to be able to deal with things like this into our plan. And again, so that over in subsequent years, that once we're clear on the business case, we know exactly what we're up for and we can get it funded.
What about
On your gangs
that's
policy?
going to be very expensive.
Well, that's something that we've been talking about for a year. We've met with all the sector groups, whether it's been aged care, whether it's been the community nurses coming out of GPs, and obviously we've understood their issues and their challenges really closely. They're losing a huge amount of staff, and those services are hugely at risk. And it's insanely fair to be do that.
Well, your fiscal plan's more
paid or
Sorry?
unpaid? Menopause leave, paid or unpaid, and then
Well, that's something that I'd have a look at, but I'm just saying to you, and I want to know more about it and how it could work, or and I'm open to exploring it further.
Well, you said this morning on the radio that your internal polling has put you at some points in the 40s, and that ACTA sitting at around 12 or above, and you continue to say that it's going to be a really tight election.
It is going to be a very close election.
So that prompts either one of two things: either you don't have confidence in your polling, or you think that National's going to lose voters. So
no, I just think there is so much at stake. There is so much at stake in this election. It is a consequential election. We have had 6 years. It's going to be close. Every MMP election is very, very close. And so what I want to make sure is that every New Zealander understands whether they have been an undecided voter, or maybe they've never voted for us before. You just saw someone I met in our store who had said they hadn't been a voter for National forever in their life and was going to do it this time round. But the point for me is I want everybody to understand what's at risk here. And what is at risk is a more of the same and a government taking us backwards, and that's not what I'm up for.
Those two things don't match up.
No, they are. They are, because I'm trying to focus everybody on their delivery.
Mr. Lux, if your polling is saying that you're above 50% and you continue to say that it's a coin toss between you and Labor, those two things don't match up.
MMP elections are always close. We have 17 days to go, and I want everybody focused.
Do you think National is going to lose significant support in the next 17 days?
I don't want to be complacent. I don't want to take anything for granted. I don't want anyone in New Zealand thinking this is a done deal. I think it's going to be an incredibly close election, and I want everybody focused on making sure they're making a very intentional, deliberate, thoughtful choice about where to direct their party vote. And my ask is that you direct it to the National Party. Last question.
Do you think a bipartisan approach should be taken by politicians when dealing with climate change?
Yes, I do. And I think that's something that we've offered actually earlier in the year to James Shaw and others. To say, hey, listen, we'd love to sit down with you, and I think all the parties in Parliament could do that, because it's a multi-generational challenge. There'll be different governments of different persuasions and different political hues over the coming years, and it's important we've got a common framework. It's hard work, don't get me wrong, it's really difficult work to work out the balance of that. No other country in the world has actually been able to crack it easily, because it's just not easy, but I think we should get the parties together and actually try and find some common ground around who carries the burden between central government, local government, property owner, this generation, next generation, and try and work a way through that. It's hard,
And you could do that post-election, regardless of who's in power.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Sorry,
last question to Amelia. Sorry.
For a colleague, are youth justice residences safe places for young people, and what would you do to improve them, given the several high-profile incidences of a sexual and violent nature?
Yeah, look, I'm very concerned about that. These are our most vulnerable Kiwi kids, and they deserve the best of care. And so sadly those facilities are needed, but what is unacceptable is clearly the quality of pastoral care, leadership, mentorship that they're actually getting. And so there are major questions to be asked about the quality and the calibre of staffing and management and leadership, and that's where I'd be going.
The Parliament Act was a bipartisan agreement between
Correct.
National and Labor.
Yep.
Does this now mean that you won't be seeking any amendments to it?
No, our position, as we talked about at the time, about the things that we want to add to it, we will add to it in government, as we've talked about. That was our conditions upon being bipartisan about it. But I think there's an opportunity for us to take a bipartisan approach to making sure we've got a climate mitigation adaptation framework in place. I think that would be a good thing.
Are you confident that tomorrow's fiscal plan will reassure Kiwis on your tax cuts?
Absolutely. As I said to you, our tax plan has been designed with a range of measures of savings, of reprioritised spending, and also a range of revenue raising as well. We have built buffer into that tax plan already. As I've said before, in our first year we actually earned $500 million more than we actually end up having to spend. And so there's room in that tax plan. There's also room in our fiscal plan dealing with the conditions that we see. So, I've always said to you for a long time, we're going to have a fully funded tax plan because we are going to deliver income tax relief to low and middle income New Zealanders. They deserve it. They really deserve it.
Literally just on that though, in the light of day...
Sorry, Amelia, can I come back? Amelia, can I just go here first and I'll come back to you?
It's just on the tax plan.
With advanced voting opening on Monday, is your message to people sort of vote early or wait and see until they've got all the facts?
I'd vote as when people ever want to, but I'd encourage them to vote early. I'd start going on Monday. We've got a lot of work to do. We want to go change this government, get this country sorted, and moved around. Yep. Sorry, Amelia, last question.
On the tax plan, in the light of day, are you prepared to now stake your job on getting that foreign buyers cash?
I'm prepared to stake my job on delivering low and middle income tax relief to New Zealanders, which is the most important because that's the outcome we're all striving to achieve and deliver. And I'm very confident in my ability to be able to raise money from foreign buyers too.
But you won't stake your job on it?
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.